Hello, everybody. So, as the title suggests, today we are going to be talking about who I believe will be selected to be America's next drag superstar. Now, keep in mind, this is not who I personally want to win Drag Race, but more so, I'm trying to attack this from the position of a producer and what I think that, RuPaul and the producers at World of Wonder are looking for in America's Next Drag Superstar. So in this video, I'll be discussing several criteria that I think the producers are looking for when it comes to selecting a winner and how they apply to previous winners. And after that, I will then discuss how I think these criteria will apply to the season 14 winner and who I think the producers will select. So as I was making this, I decided that there are 7 main categories to fill when it comes to being America's Next Drag Superstar. The first of which is overall competition performance. Now, what this means is I'm going to be going back through each season and choosing which finalist had the best track record. The second criteria is storyline. Now, what this means is which contestant's storyline throughout the season builds up most satisfyingly to their eventual win. Think of a Jinx Monsoon underdog story, or an Evie Oddly outsider storyline. Those storylines that get you invested in these reality TV characters and make you root for them in that finale. The third criteria is runway. Runway has actually become so much more important to the show as time's progressed, but even if you look at season 2, think of Tyra's finale look, or season 3 with Raja's hair look. These are some really iconic looks that you think back on when you think of their seasons. But I think where runway really started to become a staple on the show was on season 7 with Violet Chachki. That whore brought it to the runway every single week. And when you think back on her season, that is what you remember. Now when you think back on each winner, there's almost always a plethora of iconic looks you can think back on. For me, with Aquaria, I think of her ball look that she made, or Evie Oddly's jellyfish look, or my personal favorite, Jada Essence Hall's purple look, which is just immaculate, or Simone's trains look. These are all iconic looks that they brought to their season. The fourth criteria is finale performance. You guys already know. Think of Sasha Velour. Let's be real, Shea Coulee was going to win that season if Sasha Velour had not pulled those rose petals out of her wig. Recently, I think of on UK Season 3, Crystal Versace absolutely slayed that finale, and I honestly think that's what pushed her over the edge for that win. Number 5 is how do you compare to previous winners? So over the years, there have been certain archetypes that each winner has fit into. I don't believe in putting queens in boxes or generalizing them, but when it comes to winners, we've almost never had the same kind of queen win twice. For this category, I'm looking for how does this queen compare to previous winners, and how do they differentiate from the rest of the winner's circle. Number 6 is how will you serve the brand, and how will you use your platform during your reign and afterwards. This category is really about who do you represent as a queen in the general audience, and how do you serve the show and RuPaul and represent the brand. Number 7 is fan support. Now, this category is a little dicey for earlier seasons, considering I wasn't watching back then, and I only really have people's personal experiences to pull from. But in later seasons, I actually have data like the Instagram polls that I can show you for which queen had the most fan support. So now that I have gotten all of that out of the way, we can start with season 1 and go through each category throughout each season. So starting with competition performance. This one's actually going to have to go to Nina Flowers. If you look at her track record, she only has 1 win, but she was consistently in the top and never in the bottom. She only has 1 low placement. Keep in mind though that when we look at track record, I look at each individual placement, but I'm not sure if producers actually look at that. BB had the most wins, which I think does count for something, and I think that might give her an edge, but I still gave it to Nina. For storyline, I gave it to BB. Now, keep in mind, on season 1, we don't really see the reality TV storylines that we see even on the following season, like season 2. Season 1 was still trying to work out what it was, but even then, I still think that BB had the best storyline of being an immigrant and being a really successful queen and kind of working her way up, but also being consistent throughout the competition. Next up is Runway, and I actually had to give it to Nina Flowers. Her drag was really pushing the envelope at the time, and I remember a critique she would get consistently on season 1 was just how much of a drag queen she was, and it wasn't giving them like this full woman fantasy, but I don't think that's a bad thing. And if you look at her fashion, it is still so unique to anything else we've seen on the show today. And she really was the first, I don't know, I guess you could say alt queen. Next up is finale performance, and this has to go to BB. She wore that beautiful sequin gown, and she just slayed that final lip sync. Now, no one wins the previous winners category considering there were no previous winners, but we'll get more into that as we get into season 2 and beyond. Now, for brand/platform, I'm gonna have to give it to BB. I think BB's drag was the most accessible to the general audience at the time, and she represented a lot of people being an African immigrant. And for fan support, I'm actually going to have to give it to Nina. You know, I wasn't watching at the time, but from what I've researched and from the people I've talked to, it seems like Nina had the widest appreciation at the time. Now, if you'll look, we actually have a tie, which is the only instance of this happening on this list. And I think in that case, it really comes down to the brand/platform thing and who the producers think will represent the show the best, which would obviously go to BB. Alright, now moving on to season 2. This is where the show really started to take on its form that we know it today. And so for the first category, competition performance, it actually goes to the winner, Tyra Sanchez. Keep in mind, I do know that James does not associate himself with the show anymore. So when I refer to Tyra, I'm really just talking about, you know, the winner's presence on the show. Now, if we'll look at the track record, we'll see that Tyra has the most amount of wins, the first queen ever to achieve 3 wins, and was never in the bottom. She was only low once. Keep in mind there was immunity during these seasons, and she had just won the previous episode, but I don't actually think she would have been in the bottom. Tyra really slayed this season, and in terms of this category, she's the only real pick. Now for storyline, again, it goes to Tyra. Tyra is really the first instance we've seen of a reality TV villain in the sense that she was kind of an antagonistic force for a lot of the girls, but she won and she bulldozed the competition. And that's a really, for me at least watching, was a really satisfying storyline to see her just succeed in spite of sometimes having a bad personality or a bad attitude. I don't know, for me personally, those are the kind of characters I've always loved. You know, I'm toxic, I love Rachel Berry, you know, so I always love to see someone who's so confident in who they are and succeeds at everything they do, regardless of everybody else's opinion of them. Next up is Runway, and again, it goes to Tyra. I mean, come on. She was doing full drag. Now, if this was a makeup contest, it would surely go to Raven, but I think a lot of the drag that Raven wore on this season was a little basic, whereas Tyra was wearing full-on garments and really just showing up all of the other girls. Next up is finale performance, and again, it has to go to Tyra. Let me just show you guys this. Come on, she slayed this finale. It's one of my favorite garments to ever be on Drag Race. Can y'all tell I liked Tyra when I watched the show? You know, I really think she gets a bad rap, and she really did slay her season. Now, next up, compared to previous winners, I'm actually going to have to give it to Jujubee. You know, I kind of feel like she was one of the first comedy queens and confessional queens, and she really brought something different to BB. But what we'll see with these, really, I think these first couple of seasons is that these distinctions or these archetypes didn't really matter as much. Now, looking at these winner archetypes, I actually came up with 5 categories that I think all of the winners can be separated into. But keep in mind, these categories didn't really start to become as prevalent or as relevant up until I'd say around season 7. So for the pageant queen archetype, I actually put BB. Now, I know BB isn't your traditional pageant queen, but I do believe she had some pageant background before the show. But regardless, I'm more so talking about the pageant queen archetype that we've started to see build as the show has gone on. These queens normally excel in most challenges, and when they falter hard, but they come back. The next category is Jack of all trades. And the queens I put in here were queens I had trouble sorting into any of the other categories. You know, I guess you could say I had trouble fitting them into a box. They really had multiple different qualities that I thought they could be placed into different categories. So for that, I made this category where, you know, it's a queen who's very well-rounded. And so for Jack of all trades, I actually put Tyra. I just had trouble placing her anywhere else. You know, she's a really well-rounded queen, and it was hard for me to put her into a box. Again, keep in mind that these categories do not really become relevant until season 7. Right now, it's just kind of obligatory placing them where they need to be placed, but you'll start to see why this is making sense as the show has progressed. And for brand/platform, I actually put Raven. You know, I think she was just the most sure of herself and what her brand was out of everybody in the finale, and I think that gives her the edge in this category. And lastly, for Season 2 fan support, I have to give it to Raven. You know, fans really just loved her back then, and I think she had the most fan support going into that finale. And as we can see for Season 2, Tyra takes the majority of the categories for what producers are looking for in a winner. Alright, moving on to Season 3 with competition performance. I actually gave it to Raja. If we look at the track record, you'll actually see that Raja and Manila have identical track records. I only really gave it to Raja because her wins were more spaced out over the season and were kind of different types of challenges. Moving on to storyline, I actually gave it to Alexis. If we'll remember, she was in the iconic Boogers versus Heather storyline. And, you know, we always love to root for an underdog. If I was going to give it to anyone else, it would have been Raja, you know, as the fashion queen who worked with Tyra and all this stuff. But I think Alexis in that finale probably had the most satisfying storyline for a winner. And for Runway, you guys already know it's Raja. You know, she was really pushing high fashion for her season. And the outfits she designed are still iconic today. I will say Manila really gave her a run for her money with her Camp Couture, but I think what Raja was doing was really pushing boundaries, and if I had to give it to someone, I would say it would be Raja. But I really think Manila came into her own on later seasons. Next up is finale performance, and this one is really close, but again, if I had to give it to someone, I'd give it to Raja. She had that iconic look where she wore the little top hat, and I think she won that lip sync, but again, Manila was really close. This was such a close finale. And I would say Alexis was most different from previous winners. You know, she would have been the first Puerto Rican queen to ever win the show. We still haven't had that. And again, she was someone who really excelled in comedy challenges as well. But if we look, we'll see that these distinctions really didn't start to matter. Again, like I said, until season 7, you know, I really think they were just giving it to the best competitor, and they weren't really considering who was similar to others, even if we can kind of sort them into boxes. And so I decided to put Raja as the first fashion queen. Again, I would say these first 3 winners are relatively similar in kind of what they brought to the competition, but, you know, I still think these distinctions can be made. And when it comes to brand/platform, it goes to Raja. You know, Raja literally was friends with Ru before the show. And she was the most sure of herself and what she brought, and she had those connections to really be an actual supermodel and take her career to more than just what was on the show. And lastly, for fan support, I gave it to Manila. From what I know about this time, she was the most well-liked queen. You know, people loved Alexis, but I think that how the show viewed them, it was really just between Manila and Raja, and I think most fans gravitated towards Manila. But if you'll see again, Raja takes the majority of the categories. Alright, now for season 4, competition performance, it goes to the winner, Sharon. This is a trend we're going to start seeing all the way up until season 10, where the best competitor always wins. And for storyline, it goes to Sharon. You know, she kind of had that outsider storyline that we kind of start to see sort of an underdog. Maybe not like Jinx, but more of a someone whose drag is often discredited. We see this similar storyline with Evie Oddly in season 11. So she takes the storyline category. And for Runway, again, it goes to Sharon. You know, this was the first time we ever saw, I don't know what you would call it, alt drag? You know, monster drag? You know, this first runway right here, this is like Dragula level drag. And it was something we had never seen before on the show. And she really differentiated herself from anyone else who had walked that runway previously. And again, for finale performance, it goes to Sharon. You know, this category is really trivial for, I would say, seasons 4 through 6, as they really didn't do anything in the finale, but she had the best look, and I guess we can give her that much. And it is no surprise that Sharon is the most different from previous winners. You know, I'd say this is the first time they ever really had someone completely different from any of the previous winners. She was nothing we had ever seen on the show, and she is kind of the start of... And so I put her in the Kooky Queen category, which is sort of a broad category, but you'll start to see it's a lot of alternative drag, a lot of out there aesthetics. And for brand/platform, I actually put Chad. You know, we're seeing a trend of the people who end up in this category are the people who are, you know, the professionals, and they know their brand inside and out, and that was Chad Michaels. And Chad would have been someone who could really represent the franchise. And lastly, for fan support, it goes to Sharon by a landslide. From what I know about this point in time, people were obsessed with Sharon Needles. Now, we obviously know about her past and her present, but back then, people loved her. And moving right along to season 5 with competition performance, it's no surprise, it's Jinx Monsoon. She was consistently in the top, and she won 2 challenges, which each queen in that finale had 2 challenge wins, but Jinx was just a powerhouse that season, and the fact that the queens discredited her at every turn still baffles me. Moving on to storyline, it goes to Jinx. I believe Jinx is probably the most well-known out of the whole franchise for having an underdog storyline, where it was just like all of the queens who were in the top, all of them did not see Jinx's drag as valid, and they really just saw her as a joke. But Jinx came back from that, and she was always in the top, and she always excelled, no matter what other people had to say about her. Moving on the runway, we all know it wasn't Jinx, it was Roxy. I mean, come on, she was pageant perfection. You know, this candy dress she made for the ball, I'm surprised she didn't win, because this is just absolutely beautiful, and I cannot believe it's made out of candy. And for finale performance, it goes to Jinx. You know, during the actual finale, they don't really do much, but during the previous episode, the last competitive episode, Jinx absolutely turns out that acting challenge where they're in the courtroom. I still think about it, it was so funny. And for differentiation from previous winners, it goes to Jinx. She was the first comedy queen to ever win RuPaul's Drag Race. You know, it was always models or alt queens, but it was always like very fashion forward, and we all know Jinx was not fashion forward, but she was hilarious and she slayed every challenge. And for brand/platform, I actually gave it to Alaska. You know, I think we saw with All Stars 2 that Alaska was meant to win Drag Race. You know, she understands her brand and she used the platform to perfection. And I think even back on season 5, she knew who she was as a queen, and she would have delivered what she gave us for All Stars 2 as a winner. And for fan support, it actually goes to Jinx. From what I know, people loved Jinx. People also really loved Alaska. You know, Roxy was obviously given that villain edit, but I think that the majority of people really gravitated towards Jinx and rooted for her as an underdog. Alright, now moving on to season 6, the best competitor was Bianca Del Rio. I believe she has the best track record in Drag Race history. Other than, I think, Envy Peru. She was never in the bottom, she was never below safe, she had 3 wins. It's honestly iconic, and really, how could you pick anyone else to win other than her? When it comes to storyline, this was a tough one, but I actually gave it to Adore, just because I always tend to think that underdog storyline is more satisfying, or that young ingenue. But I will say that it's pretty much tied with Bianca. You know, it's also very satisfying to just see someone be good at what they do and deliver it at every turn. So it really comes down to preference, but I just put Adore. And for Runway, this goes to Courtney Act. I mean, that's pretty much all the judges saw in her. I mean, I think she's more than that, but come on, she just was beautiful on the runway. You know, it's iconic for Michelle saying, "Stop relying on that body," which that critique has pretty much disappeared nowadays on Drag Race. But, like, this angel look is so iconic, I could stare at it all day. I mean, these are the best wings we've ever seen on Drag Race. So, yeah, I gave it to her. And then when it comes to finale performance, I gave it to Bianca. Again, this is sort of negligible because up until season 7, you know, seasons 4 through 6, they didn't really do anything, but I really liked Bianca's look, and she was very put together, so I gave it to her. And then, compared to previous winners, I actually gave it to Adore, but I think it could have gone to Adore or Courtney. You know, we hadn't gotten that fashion queen in a while, and we hadn't gotten an underdog storyline, and I think Adore was just a really prominent character in the season. But when we look at the winner archetypes, I actually had a really hard time not putting Bianca in the comedy category. But when I really thought about it, I was like, she's so much more than comedy. You know, she won the first episode on a design challenge. So to me, she's more of that well-rounded jack of all trades. But I'd say she's very similar to Jinx in the type of queen that she was. So for season 7, they really had to switch things up. And for brand/platform, again, I chose Bianca. You know, it's pretty clear she came right out the gate knowing exactly who she was, and she delivered it at every single turn. We're seeing a trend with that, and so I think she was the best pick to be the winner because of that. And we saw her, she's one of the most successful winners of the entire franchise. She sells out shows by herself, which is something a lot of girls can't say. And finally, for fan support, it goes to Bianca. We can finally start to look at the Instagram polls and see that Bianca was in the lead with 21.5K, with Adore trailing close behind her. You know, with the Instagram polls, we can finally sort of have a definitive way of looking at who had the most fan support at the time. Moving on to season 7, this is where we really start to see a lot of the modern mechanisms that we know about Drag Race today come to fruition. When it comes to competition performance, Violet takes the cake. She was never in the bottom. She had a couple of low placements, but never was in the bottom 2. She had 3 wins, but was never in the bottom 2, unlike Ginger, who was in the bottom 2 twice. So she really excelled on her season and had the best track record. Again, when it comes to storyline, it goes to Violet. She was, at the time, the youngest queen to be on RuPaul's Drag Race, and she was criticized by a lot of older queens for her youth. You know, she was, I would say, the second villain to ever win Drag Race, and we haven't had one win since. So, yeah, it goes to her. For Runway, there's really no competition. It goes to Violet. She put the runway on RuPaul's Drag Race on the map. She was serving high fashion every single week. And it was really nothing we'd ever seen to the caliber that she did it. You know, her Death Becomes Her look that we're looking at right now, that was a cultural reset. So, Violet takes the cake. When it comes to finale performance, Violet takes the cake again. She had a really great burlesque performance, and then this purple look is just to die for. And compared to previous winners, it goes to Violet again. And this is finally where we get into that modern drag race mechanism where I think a lot of people were rooting for Ginger. She had a great edit, whereas Violet kind of got a more antagonistic edit. But the producers knew they couldn't crown Ginger because they had already had Bianca and Jinx win the past 2 seasons. So they had to switch things up. And for that, I think that's one of the main reasons why Violet won. Not to say that she didn't deserve it. Obviously, if you're in that finale, I think you have a chance. But I think that was a really big deciding factor for them. Bianca and Jinx were in that same vein of being comedy queens, so with season 7, this is where that distinction really started to become important of being different from previous winners, and it has stayed that way ever since. As we'll see, Violet is the second fashion queen to ever win. And moving forward, we never see a repeat in the type of queen that wins the show. Moving on to brand/platform, it goes to Ginger. And a lot of that does have to do with age. How could Violet know who she was as a queen and solidify her brand at the age of 21 years old? So, Ginger was so sure of herself and she knew what she delivered, but it wasn't enough for her to take the crown. And lastly, and shockingly, when it comes to fan support, Pearl had the most fan support going into the finale with 16.8k likes. I was truly shocked, but it makes sense. Rue was right. Rue was like, the fans are gonna love you, and they did. They really did. Moving on to season 8, it's no surprise the best performance goes to Bob the Drag Queen. Bob had 3 wins, the most in the competition, and was only in the bottom 2 once, and the rest of his placements were safe. He really dominated this season. When it comes to storyline, again, it goes to Bob. It's that same Tyra storyline, that same Bianca storyline of dominating the competition and knowing who you are and doing it flawlessly. When it comes to fashion, it's Naomi. Kim gave her a run for her money, but it's like Naomi says, it's fashion, and girl, it really was. I mean, look at this. She made this. She made that scarecrow outfit, and it's iconic to this day. And for finale performance, it's Bob. Come on, the purse first performance, I love it. And then seeing her get crowned, it's one of my favorite reactions ever. And I think it's the prettiest Bob has ever looked. I love, love, love that gold gown. And compared to previous winners, it goes to Bob. Kim and Naomi, they were those fashion girls, and Bob was our second comedy queen. So it really made sense, and I just love it. And when it comes to brand/platform, it goes to Bob. I'm starting to notice a trend of these more comedy-centric queens really having their brand solidified more so than the fashion queens. I think part of that is that most of the fashion queens seem to be a bit younger versus someone like Raja who took the brand/platform category because she was more seasoned and she knew what she brought, even as a fashion queen. And lastly, with fan support for season 8, it actually goes to Kim Chi. Kim Chi was in a minor lead to Bob trailing close behind, and Naomi close behind Bob. It was very close, but Kim Chi was definitely the fan favorite of the season. Alright, moving on to season 9. This is the first time where we see the best competitor not win the season. Shea Coulee was the first queen since Sharon Needles to win 4 challenges in 1 season. But alas, none of it mattered when those rose petals fell. Let's just say that. Season 9 was an interesting season in that there weren't many storylines. It's very similar to what's going on now in season 14, where all of the queens were very likable and they all kind of just excelled in the competition without having a need for a villain or an underdog. But I gave the best storyline to Sasha Velour. She opened up about why she's bald and her story with her mother, and it was very impactful for a lot of people, and I think she takes it for best storyline. For Runway, again, it goes to Sasha Velour. I mean, she was another one of those, maybe I guess you could say, alternative queens, in that her drag wasn't the mainstream, and she was really incorporating her art into every single thing she did on the runway. And next, the greatest perpetrator when it comes to finale performance, it's Sasha Velour. I mean, come on. I would say this is one of the main determining factors of why she won. I mean, if you look at the categories that we're about to see, she does fill most of them, but I really am not sure if it would have counted had she not pulled this stunt. And next up, when compared to previous winners, it goes to Sasha Velour again. You know, she's the second, I guess you could say, kooky queen to win. You know, kooky is what I'm calling these alternative, artistic or maybe monstrous girls who really experiment with their art through drag. After Bob, it was the obvious choice. Shea Coulee slayed her season like Bob. She excelled in a lot of challenges. I would say she more so fits in the jack of all trades category, but still, I think she was just too similar to what had come before, and they needed to shake things up. Again, when it comes to brand/platform, I give it to Sasha because her drag character was fully realized and she delivered it from the get-go. Now, when it comes to fan support, it actually goes to Shea. Now, keep in mind, this poll actually comes from Facebook because for season 9, for whatever reason, they didn't do Instagram posts, but we can see that Shea was in a pretty big lead with Sasha following right behind her. And now that brings us to season 10. This is the last season where we're going to see the best competitor win, at least the technical best competitor. Aquaria had 3 wins and was never in the bottom. When it comes to storyline, I actually gave it to Eureka. Eureka had a lot to overcome from her season 9 journey onto season 10. She had injured her knee and she was going through the whole PTSD of that. And she started out in the bottom at the beginning of the season and slowly rose her way to the top. So I think that would have been a more satisfying storyline. But again, Aquaria is one of those examples that, for me, I really like to see where a queen just slays the season and wins it. And for Runway, isn't it obvious? It's Aquaria. I mean, come on. This ball look she made. Again, it's one of my favorite looks from the entire franchise. I can't believe she made this. I love to look at it. It's these shapes. It's so smart. She has such an eye for design. And she's just one of those iconic fashion queens. When it comes to finale performance, I gotta give it to Eureka. She had reveals, she was smart with her stunts, and from what we've heard about the finale, during that first round, the only reason there was a double Shantae was because Aquaria, I think, tripped. But they didn't show that because it seemed they wanted Aquaria in that top 2. And when compared to previous winners, I gotta give it to Aquaria. I think she was the most different from the previous winners. She was that third fashion queen after Violet and after Raja. It was Sasha and Bob before her, and one was an alternative queen and one was a comedy queen. So it seemed like the perfect time to have a fashion queen come back. When it comes to brand/platform, I actually have to give it to Asia. I think she, out of everyone, was the most seasoned, and that's really what I'm looking for in this category. She knew her brand, and I think she delivered it very well and would have been a great ambassador for the series. And finally, with the most fan support, it is Aquaria by a long shot. The first queen to receive 100,000 likes, and wow. People wanted her to win. Moving on to season 11, this is the second time where we see the queen with the best track record lose the crown, and it really starts to become a trend after this. The queen with the best track record was none other than Brooklyn Heights. With 3 wins, she takes the cake. And to be honest, I don't really agree with all of her wins, but she got them. Moving on to best storyline, it's Evie Oddly. This is the second time where we really see this Sharon Needles-esque storyline of the queens just discrediting Evie's drag and not really seeing her as competition. But in the end, she overcomes that and goes on to win the season. Next up is Runway, and it goes to Evie. She had such a unique point of view, and I think that's what we're starting to see with every winner is that when it comes to the runway, their point of view is so unique, and their runways are just so memorable. And when it comes to finale performance, it goes to Evie Oddly. I gotta say, this is probably the second most iconic finale performance after Sasha Velour. I mean, the mirrors, the face on the back of the headpiece, her doing a backflip in a gown. It was iconic, and I still think about it to this day. And when it comes to previous winners, it goes to Evie Oddly. She really was so different to the previous winner in Aquaria, and she's the third Kooky Queen. And when it comes to brand/platform, I give it to Evie again. She had a fully realized drag character and drag aesthetic, and she knew who she was at every point in and out of drag. And lastly, with the most fan support, it's Evie Oddly again. If you look at the Instagram poll, Evie was in the lead by about 20,000 likes, but Brooklyn was trailing close behind, but fans really seemed to like Evie. Poor Silky and Akira did not stand a chance on this one. And now, moving on to my favorite main season, it's Season 12. And the best competitor being Gigi Good. She is the third queen on the US franchise to achieve 4 wins in one season. That is after Sharon and Shea Coulee. And the queen with the best storyline is Crystal Method. Now, Season 12 is another one of those seasons that doesn't really have too many main overarching storylines. But, Crystal says it in her Losing is the New Winning verse. Crawled up from the bottom, I made it to the top. And I really tend to enjoy that storyline of a queen starting out in the bottom, but, climbing their way to the top. And so that's why I think Crystal has the best storyline. And the queen with the best runways is Jada Essence Hall. I mean, come on, she made everything herself. This purple look that's on screen now is my absolute favorite look on Drag Race of all time. I cannot say that enough. I love it so much, and the fact that she made it is just even better to me. She destroyed that runway, and she brought pageant perfection. And the queen with the best finale performance is Jada Essence Hall, in my opinion. She didn't have to do too much. She did it all from her home. She didn't do crazy props and sets. She just brought herself, and that was enough. And what's on screen now, this finale outfit, if this was in person, it would have been such a gag. It's, again, one of my favorite looks of all time. And she just is that bitch to me. My favorite winner, besides Bob. And compared to previous winners, it's gonna have to go to Jada. Again, she is our second pageant queen to win Drag Race. I'd really say the first. I'm just talking about the winner archetypes. But when it comes to true pageant queen, Jada is the first one. And she is so different from any of the previous winners. And it was just so fantastic to see her win. And when it comes to brand/platform, again, it goes to Jada. I mean, she is pageant drag personified, and she did it to a T. And she showed that pageant queens are more than just a look. They're just oozing with personality, And when it comes to fan support, it goes to Crystal Method. Fans loved Crystal Method. She was in the lead for the poll and almost achieved 200,000 likes. Interestingly enough, Jada was last in the poll, which is really shocking to me, but remembering back on that time, she didn't have as many supporters as she does now. So I think this win really did a lot for her. And, when someone wins Drag Race, automatically the public perception switches. And I think people really started to see, oh, this queen is excellent. And it's a shame that they couldn't see that before she won. And now we have reached the most recent season before, obviously, Season 14, Season 13. And shockingly enough, Rosé actually has the best track record. She only has 3 wins compared to Simone's 4 wins, but Rosé never landed in the bottom versus Simone landed in the bottom twice. In my opinion, the way I see it, I feel like Simone still kind of has the best track record, but if we're going off of the math, it's Rosé. It should be noted that Simone is the fourth queen to achieve 4 wins on a main US season after Sharon, Shea, and Gigi. Next up is storyline, and I think Simone had the best storyline. It's odd, it's almost like Simone had this storyline of like, this win was her destiny, if I'm remembering correctly, and like, she had a lot to overcome in her season, like when she landed in the bottom. You know, she was very turbulent on her season. It's like she slayed the season, but she would have these low points that made us root for her even more. I think her storyline is very interesting, and it doesn't get talked about enough. The next category is Runway, and for me, it goes to Simone. I know a lot of people are going to be thinking it should be Gottmik, but for me, Simone was the main runway queen of the season. Her runways were conceptual, and for me, they were also memorable. Gottmik was very technically abled, but I just think Simone has that eye, and just everything looks good on her, so for that reason, I give it to Simone. And for finale performance, it really wasn't a contest. I mean, on the runway, Gottmik really delivered. I mean, I think all 4 of them had really great runways, but Simone had the best runways, and then when you get into the lip syncs, it was no competition. Honestly, I mean, Simone just slayed all of them. Rosé and Gottmik aren't really known for their lip syncing, and Candy's lip sync on the final one was a little bit odd to me, considering I consider Candy to be a very strong lip syncer. And then for differentiation from previous winners, I actually chose Gottmik. You know, I think Simone is a really great pick, and I would have picked her too, but when it comes to who is the most different from previous winners, I feel like Gottmik's aesthetic was very different, as well as Gottmik being a trans queen. You know, Gottmik would have been the first trans winner had he won. Again, it was really hard to categorize Simone in a certain archetype, so I put her in Jack of all trades because I feel like she really is such a well-rounded queen and doesn't really have like a niche. And then for brand/platform, I actually gave it to Simone. She was just so sure of herself, and again, she knew her brand, and that's what counts. And if you look at her reign, she has been one of the most successful winners to come out of Drag Race, and in such a short time. It really is crazy. And lastly, fan support by a very close margin goes to Gottmik. If you look at the poll, Gottmik was in the lead, but not by much. And now this brings us to present day, Season 14, what this whole video has been leading up to. Who will win Season 14 based on this criteria? So I thought we would first start out by looking in depth at each of their track records. Starting with Lady Camden, who is in the lead with 3 wins and 1 bottom. And then Angie and Willow are tied for second place with 4 points. Angie having 2 wins, 2 bottoms, and Willow having 1 win and 2 bottoms. Then in 4th place, it's Bosco with 3 wins, but 2 bottoms. And then Daya in last place with negative points with 1 win and 3 bottoms. So it's pretty clear that competition performance goes to Lady Camden. Lady Camden actually got this lead very late in the game. Angie and Willow were tied for first previously, but this bottom 2 really sent them down, and this last win really elevated Lady Camden. And when it comes to storyline, again, it's interesting. Season 14 is another one of these seasons that doesn't really have your typical reality TV storylines. It was just really these queens competing and interacting. But I'd say when it comes to the most compelling storyline, I'm going to have to give it to Willow Pill. You know, she's a disabled person, and I want to add, I don't think a disability is a storyline for a reality TV show, but it has created a really compelling storyline to see her, you know, work with her disability throughout the show and succeed and come out on the top in the end. And next up is Runway, and I gotta give it to Willow Pill. She just has the most memorable runways of the season. She's so conceptual, and again, that's what we're looking for in a winner, is somebody whose looks you're going to remember. And I think almost all of Willow's looks you're going to remember. There are other queens on this season whose runways I have loved, but I gotta be real, none of them I remember as well as I remember Willow's looks. When it comes to finale performance, I actually predict Lady Camden doing the best. You know, think of her stunt on the main stage. Things like that you think of, that is what I'm looking for in a finale, and I feel like Lady Camden has those tricks up her sleeve. I will add, I also think Willow has a very weird mind and could think of something really crazy to do for the finale, so I'm looking forward to see what she does as well. And when it comes to previous winners, I'm gonna have to give it to Willow. I think she is the most different compared to our previous two winners. I'd say she fits more in the kooky category versus Lady Camden is more of a jack of all trades. Like, she isn't really someone who can be categorized. And, you know, we just had Simone, who is that jack of all trades as well. So I'd say it's really gonna have to be Willow Pill if we're basing it on this criteria, you know? She's just the most unique when it comes to comparing her to previous winners. And when it comes to brand/platform, I'm gonna have to give it to Willow Pill again. I think out of everyone in this finale, she's the most sure of herself and sure of her brand. She knows her brand well, inside and out, and she knows her sense of humor, and that really shows. And I think if she wins, she would be a great representation for the trans community. She'd be our first main season trans winner, and I think that's really important. And lastly, when it comes to fan support, it goes to Willow Pill by a landslide. If you look at the polls, Willow is leading by a long shot. These are the current numbers as I'm making this, and I'm sure they're even higher now. But yeah, the fans are really behind Willow Pill. Lady Camden's in a close second, but if you look at this, we know who fans want to win, and it's Willow Pill. So with that being said, it looks like we have our winner. Based on this criteria that I think Ru and the producers are looking for, I think Willow Pill is undoubtedly going to be crowned. And it makes sense, you know. She fits all of these categories perfectly, and if I was going to choose a winner, I would probably choose her too. I'm personally rooting for Lady Camden, but I honestly can't say I'd be mad at Willow winning because she deserves it. Her storyline really reminds me of Edie Oddly's storyline, at least maybe not storyline, but track record wise. So yeah, I basically told y'all what we all already know, and that's that I think Willow's going to win. So let me know who you think is going to win as well, if you disagree with any of my criteria. And also let me know who you want to win though. Who you think is going to win and who you want to win. Thank you guys all so much. I had so much fun making this. This is my first YouTube video. So if you want, please like and subscribe. That would really help me out a lot. And with that being said, bye!